Imposter syndrome says we're not authors.
But here's our books.
And here's our podcast. We are two book nerds talking about our indie author experiences
to spread the love of indie publishing and help other indies not feel alone.
Thanks for joining us, and now on to the show.
Welcome back to another episode of Indie Book Nerds Podcast. We're your hosts, Jade Neoma
and Morgan Christensen, and we're excited to welcome today's guest, Cara Blaine.
Thank you for having me.
Cara Blaine lives in southern Arizona with her husband, 2 children, and their dog, Mackenzie. She has a degree in psychology and creative writing and has been working with children in many different settings since high school. She is an award-winning poet, and she began writing novels in 2022.
And her book, Luxe's Lullaby, is a romantic portal fantasy following Luxe as she embarks on a journey to fulfill a prophecy with 3 high-fae males destined to aid her. It does come with some content warnings that include violence, killing, death of a parent, sexual activity, threat of sexual assault, abduction, and torture off-page.
Tell us, what is your novel about in your own words, and when did it release?
So the series, Luxe's Lullaby Trilogy, is about Luxe, who is half witch and half fae, but she does not know that for her life up until the start of this book, basically. Her aunt passes, and that's when she discovers who she really is. And the series just follows her journey of discovering her magic, but also discovering that there is a prophecy about her overthrowing the Fae Queen, who happens to be her grandmother. So that's the tiny version of a summary.
Awesome. And when did they release?
March of 2024 was the first book. And since I rapid released them, second book came out in May and third book came out in July.
That's amazing. I had no idea that you rapid released them. And so I'm sure that your readers are absolutely thrilled with that and being able to jump from one book to the next one and not having to wait for many, many, many years. So what is your writing journey, and what brought you to be the writer that you are today?
I've been writing since I learned how to write. So poems and stories starting in 2nd grade. I loved books. I was a bookworm of a kid, and I continued through college. As you mentioned, I studied creative writing alongside psychology for my bachelor's. Around that time is when I won a couple of awards for my poetry. I did take kind of a 10-year hiatus after I got married and had kids. I didn't do much of anything creative at all. I was home raising kids and homeschooling them as well. So I was very busy, but I got back into it around 2018 when I took a poetry workshop, and I started writing poetry again. I never thought I'd write a novel. I actually sat down to write a novel probably a little before 2018, and I wrote a few pages, and I was like, this is so many words. And I Googled how many words are in the average novel, and I was like, nope, that's too many words. I'm a poet. I can't write that many words. And I gave it up. But in 2022, for whatever reason, I had the inspiration for a story, and I was like, I'm going to write this. And so I sat down and wrote it, and wrote my first novel.
Yeah, I love that you seem to have always really wanted to be a writer. I think that it's always been in you and has clawed its way out of you one way or another.
Yes. And having been a writer like so long ago, and still like it's still kind of clinging to you. It's kind of like it was always meant to be. That's how I feel about my writing skills anyway. What inspired the Luxe's Lullaby trilogy?
This particular series was inspired by a very random one-line writing prompt that I found on the internet one day. And I put it into my folder of writing ideas. And when I finished Curse of the Soul Collector, which was my 4th book, I went into my story ideas. I was like, what do I want? I have so many ideas. Are you guys like that too?
Yes.
A long list of ideas. So I was like, what do I want to write next? The writing prompt reads, your character makes a living faking psychic powers. One morning, they wake up with real ones. Which is not exactly how it plays out in Luxe, but that is what got me started writing that first chapter. So,
no, that's awesome. And I know I have a lot of book ideas that could get on or some of them are on a page somewhere that I can refer back to. And I do see a lot of those writing prompts on like Pinterest and stuff, and I kind of always like kind of ho hum about them, like that would be cool. But they clearly, you're evidence of it that they inspire books, and they don't have to necessarily be that exact idea. It can kind of like take, form in a whole new life of its own, which is really cool. What excuse me, what mythology did you include in this trilogy, and what was the most exciting piece of mythology for you to include in the books?
I included so much mythology in these books, and that was one of my favorite parts of writing them. I love folklore, mythology, fairy tales from all over the world. I have a whole shelf dedicated to anthologies of that kind of thing. And so when I got the world building idea of like how the realms were connected, it just made it so not easy, but it made it so possible for me to include mythology from all over the world. So there's the books start out with mostly Greek and Celtic, which more people are probably familiar with, and then it eventually the series includes Old Norse, Indigenous American, Middle Eastern, Russian, Spanish. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but as much as I could within that story and only three books. I missed a lot, obviously, and hopefully I can fit some of that into future books. But probably my favorite creature, mythological being that I wrote into the story was the jinn from the Middle East.
Can you tell us what the jinn is?
So, in the westernized version, right, the jinn is the genie, like the genie in the lamp. Um, the traditional Middle Eastern stories of jinn are they're kind of these spirits of fire and air. They're shapeshifters. Um, it depends on where in the Middle East and the time period, but sometimes they're troublemakers and sometimes they're helpers, right? Um, they're just really mutable, flexible kind of creatures that could have all kinds of magic. And I think that's why they're so fun is, in my story, they can shapeshift. They can be flame, they could be a bird, they could be, fey or human looking. Um, and they're also because of that nature, they're also kind of volatile emotionally, which makes it fun and interesting to write them as well. So I think a lot of my readers also really love the Jinn, even though they don't have a huge role in the book. They're in book three, but they're just they're just fun to write and fun to learn about. And I do include notes in the back of my books because I did take liberties, right, with the original. Like, I took the general idea of these creatures or these myths, and I put my own tweaks on them, and then I included notes just to be like, hey, so this is the recorded, um, actual culturally accurate representation of these creatures, which I used a little bit of, but then I did a little bit of my own thing with. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love how you kind of took all these things that inspired you and really got you fired up and you put them into your book and now your readers are going to learn along with, going through your book. They get to learn all these different like mythology from all over the world and I love that you put that note at the end of the book. I think that that's really unique because I think a lot of times people just are like, well, it's fantasy, and like we'll just say that I already did take my little spin on it. But what I love about you putting that at the end is you're giving your readers the opportunity to like learn the truths about it, but also see how you took like creative liberty with it, and that is what's the most interesting and like unique part about it is that you showed how you were influenced by it too, and I think that that's really really cool. So, what made you choose the elements of your book that you did? For example, why did you go with a portal fantasy?
Portal fantasy made sense to me because I knew there would be two different connected realms, and a portal just seems like the most obvious way to make that work. I've also read tons of portal fantasies in my life and just loved them, whether it was the Wrinkle in Time kind of books, Narnia. I know there was lots others, and they're just lots of fun. So yeah, that just seemed like the simplest, most obvious way to make my two realms be connected.
Yeah. And why did you choose to have fae and witches as well?
Most of my books are witchy. I like witchy fantasy. I am a witchy person, and so that's just kind of a given. Um, as far as fae, I mean, who doesn't love fae? I've read so many fae books in my life, or elves, or whatever, whether it's Lord of the Rings or ACOTAR, etc. I've always enjoyed them, and I always knew I wanted to write a story with my own take my own version of Faye, and it was super fun.
Yeah, I also love Faye. I think for me and a lot of other readers, ACOTAR was kind of the first introduction back into reading once we were adults and had stepped away from it for a little bit. And so for me, that's where I also got the inspiration for Faye in my book. And as for witchy stuff, I can definitely relate because I love putting lots of little witchy things into my books, even in like maybe more subtle ways. But I also have this fantasy oracle deck which I really love because it says somewhere in the booklet that you can use it for Dungeons and Dragons to come up with your characters or a character arc. And I've always thought that it would be really cool to use that for inspiration when writing another book. So, what was your favorite scene or dialogue to write?
I am not great at choosing favorites, but I'm going to go with a scene for book one. My favorite, I can't choose like a favorite scene in the whole series. That's literally impossible. Don't ask me my favorite character either. For book one, my favorite scene is towards the beginning when Lux first meets Surin. And Surin shows up and he's like, "So I know things about your parents." And she's like, "What are you talking about? And who the heck are you?" Because her parents disappeared 20 years ago and she's never seen this guy in her life. Um, so they go and they sit at a cafe. She's like, "I'm not gonna like go somewhere alone with you. I'm not dumb." So they go to a public place and they sit in a cafe and she orders soup and a bread bowl, which incidentally I've had so many people like read that scene and then go buy soup and a bread bowl somewhere. I like putting food into my novels. But she ends up throwing soup at him. And so the scene is, it was fun to write because it's funny, but also because it really in a small amount of time shows a lot about these two main characters' personalities.
That's awesome. We love throwing foodstuffs at men, strange men who claim to think that they know about us. Though I assume that Soren does know maybe a thing or two because that's the point of the book. Um, to kind of contrast that last question, what was your the most difficult scene to write or dialogue?
I think that would be a couple of scenes in book three where one of the main characters is captured and tortured by the antagonist, by the villain. And I love this character. Everyone loves this character. And I really put them through not happy things. And that was hard for me to write. A lot of writers, seem to enjoy torturing their characters. It was a necessary part of the plot, but I cried. It was hard. I didn't want to do that to that person. So,
Yeah, I can relate. I too have a scene in my book where a particular favored character of mine gets uh in a rough spot from the villain. They're kind of at his mercy. So I can relate, and it is hard because especially with that scene, always had to be in a good headspace for it, and always had to have self care prior and then after. Had to like cuddle a cat or something because it is rough. And but if you're crying during the scenes, that means your readers are, so you're doing something right. What is your favorite thing about writing a why choose romance?
so I do want to mention that I didn't intend to write a Why Choose Romance. I am a pantser of a writer, and I thought that Surin and Lux would maybe be in a fated mate kind of situation. And that's how I started writing the first few chapters. But then they met these other two high males, and they just took my plan and tore it into pieces and threw it out the window entirely. So there's that. It wasn't even my intention, but characters do what they want, is my experience when I'm writing. And it's funny how non-writers don't understand that, by the way. They're just like, "But you're the characters." I'm like, "I don't know what to tell you." Like, they do not listen to me. They just don't. So, but my favorite part, I think, is just that, you know, I'm an indecisive person. Like, I would have a hard time choosing between these three guys. And uh, who doesn't want to have their cake and eat it too? That's just fun. But also because I like to see representation of non-typical hetero-monogamous relationships in books. And, I just think that's important. All love matters. All love is valid. As long as we're not hurting each other, I think all types of love should be represented in art.
Yeah, I love that because I know that they say reading is the best way to develop more empathy and good levels of empathy, and continuing to read sustains those levels of empathy. So I think having your story represent types of relationships that do exist in the world and are and should be loved and accepted as well is really interesting because your characters are showing people who are reading your book what this perspective is like and what it's like for them. And it's especially good for people who are in those types of relationships to see that type of representation, but also for people to maybe get outside of their comfort zone and read about something different and learn to sympathize and empathize with those characters and gain, a new perspective.
I've had multiple readers come to me and be like, I was not into White Shoes, but I gave your book a shot anyway, and they just loved the books. And so that made me feel really good. Like they opened their, not necessarily like they're gonna go jump into polyamory tomorrow, but like it opened their minds a little bit to being like, I can still enjoy characters that are doing something I wouldn't necessarily do, right? That's the empathy piece, right?
Oh yeah, that's a huge piece of it. I think that that's so important. Is sometimes we see criticism of books, and it's more from the perspective of like, well, this is just something you wouldn't choose to do, and that's okay because this is what this story is about. And I think that I love that. Did you have any difficulties when you were writing your White Shoes, even though you kind of stumbled into it?
It is trickier to write a relationship among four people than say the typical two. It's just more complex. You have four completely different personalities instead of the two, and it would be nice if they just all got along all the time, but that's not at all realistic. So there are conflicts and there are tension and figuring all that out and like the balance of it, to the point that yes, they still all want to be together as a group, but they're not just happy all the time. Um, it's a little bit challenging and complex. Aside from that, writing like physical spice scenes with four people was really hard for me because I don't have great spatial awareness or understanding. I'm like trying to picture and then describe on the page like what four different bodies are doing in any given moment was really, really hard for me. But I think I did okay, but it was not easy.
Yeah, I also definitely lack spatial awareness, and I think it's sometimes it is hard to write like physical scenes. I mean, it's easy when you're writing something like he picks up the cup and then sits down at the table versus describing something in a way that's not cringy, but in a way that's still a little bit tasteful or maybe a little bit spicier or like however you want to go with it. And I think it's funny because I'm sure that readers when they imagine writers writing these scenes, they probably don't see us getting really frustrated. Like they're like, oh yeah, that was like a really hot scene. I loved it. And then you're sitting here like ripping your hair out and you're like, how do I describe it? How do I make this make sense?
Yeah, exactly. Same for battle scenes for me. The physical description part is just really challenging because I just can't. I don't know my left from my right most of the time, like I just can't. I can't figure out what's happening or how to describe it.
Yeah, and how many times can you say the word he punched him? She punched him and over and over and over. Because that's what's happening in my
Right?
head. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, they're punching each other, and that's the only way I know how to
Fighting.
write fighting. What character gave you the most trouble as an author?
I think it was the villain, the Fey Queen, because I personally find it challenging, even though I know how important it is to write out fully fleshed out, complex villains. And that's just something I've always found a little bit challenging. So I put the extra thought and effort into it, but it does take a lot of extra thought and effort for me to make sure that that happens.
Yeah, I totally get that. In my book, I had a similar experience because I obviously knew that he was going to be a bad guy going in, so I knew like how he was going to be a bad guy. But what was difficult for me was like, well, why is he bad? Like, why is he doing all of this? Like, what are his motivations? And you can get really creative with these types of things. Like, I was watching a YouTube video where someone was describing like how to make your villains make sense, and he was like, just pick something, and it doesn't even have to be rational because sometimes the irrational part of it is like what makes it compelling. And so I saw one where his example was just like, imagine he gets cut off in a parking lot and he's just like really mad about that guy and he continues to be mad about that guy and it spirals into this like hate for society. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. But it is hard. It's so hard to try and make your villain not just a bad guy, but to make him actually like a well-rounded bad guy.
Yeah, villains are something else. I feel like my villain, in my book, I didn't really know what he was going to be until he kind of showed his true colors throughout the story. And yeah, that they don't exactly need rationale either, because there was somebody that was just like, your villain needs, I need him to have a sad backstory. It's like, he doesn't need to have a sad backstory. He's just a psychopath. Sometimes there are just bad people in the world, and it's not cool, but it happens. So,
True.
but that does make them kind of difficult to write. They're all so different. Well, Kara, do you listen to music when you write, or do you have like a routine when you get to the keyboard and start doing your thing?
I do listen to music. I generally, as I'm writing the beginning of a story, I start to build a playlist for that story. And that's the playlist I listen to the entire time I'm writing and editing it. And usually when I'm not writing and editing it, because I hyperfixate a little bit. So um, most of my books come with playlists for that reason. I end up including that playlist in the book. And other than listening to that music though while I write, I don't really have any routine other than like I don't love writing first thing in the morning. My brain isn't the best first thing in the morning. I like writing in the afternoon and evening, but aside from that, I don't sit down and do a meditation and light a candle or anything like that. I just put on the music and wherever I am, whether um, I'm on an airplane or I'm at my desk, I just listen to the music and I write.
I
What kind of
envy that.
music is it? Sorry.
It depends on the book. It's usually a pretty eclectic mix. I'll say that. The playlist for my current work in progress is I pulled a lot of the songs from this playlist I found on Spotify that was called Southern Gothic. So that gives you a little bit of idea for the feel. But it's all sorts of music. It's just what I think fits certain characters or vibes of the story or lyrics that fit or whatever. It's a big mix.
Yeah, I was saying that I envy your ability to write wherever you are. I'm kind of someone who has to be at my desk, or I don't know, it's just very hard for me to focus if I'm not like in one place and completely alone. Like if anybody's around me, I just can't focus. So I absolutely envy that. What are your publishing plans for the future, and what's ahead for your series or other books that you have potentially in the works?
So, first, I just want to mention I put out a very small little mini collection of poetry like 2 days ago. So, that's my most recent. It's called Blood Loss and Dandelions. And as far as the future, I have my current work in progress will be launched via Kickstarter in February. It's called Token of a Wolf. The series is the Venandi Venator duology. And so next year I will publish both Token of a Wolf and the second book in that duology, which is called Promise of a Bruja. And aside from that, as far as the Luxe series, I'm working on a short story that will be in an anthology, but it's a prequel to the Luxe series about her parents. So that will come out, I think, September of next year. And I also, at some point, do want to write one novella per male main character in the Lux series. So one for Sir and one for Calix and one for Alistair. That will happen someday. I don't know when, but eventually.
That's so cool. I love that it's like this trilogy is done, but then you're like, no, it's not, because I'm going to add so many more things to it. That's my favorite when authors do that. It feels like you're getting little goodies and you don't have to let go of the world that you love so much and you've spent so much time reading yet. You're like, I can hang on for just a little bit longer. So I really love that.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that Token of a Wolf has crossover of those characters too. The Lux characters appear in it, so that's fun.
That's even better. That's even better. And congratulations on releasing that poetry just 2 days ago. That's really, really exciting. So, what made you choose indie publishing instead of going for traditional publishing?
I did my research, and I do think there are pros and cons to both ways, and it's a very individual decision as far as what pros and cons mean the most to you and what you prioritize. I initially like just assumed that I would query my debut novel, and once I did the research, I just decided, you know what, I don't want to give up my creative rights. I don't like the timeline of traditional publishing. Assuming you find an agent and a publisher, that whole process can take 2 to 10 years or longer, right? Um, I follow authors who did trad publishing who queried for like 7 years before they had any luck, and I just wanted to put my art out into the world, and knowing that like only 1% of manuscripts that get queried ever end up with a publisher was just seems silly to me. I know I'm a good writer. I don't need the what's the word I'm looking for?
Validation.
There's the validation, I mean, really, some people take trad published authors more seriously, I guess is what I'm saying, right? There's a certain level of respect that comes with that. I don't really care what other people think about me. So I didn't like the timeline. I didn't want to give up creative control of my work and not have any say in the cover, or, end up working with an editor I didn't like, or any of that kind of thing. It just, none of that was appealing to me. And I felt like, for me, the one thing that might pull me towards trad publishing would be that traditionally they help with marketing, or in the past they've helped a lot with marketing. But that's not so much the case anymore. Most small authors are marketing themselves in their own books and doing most of that by themselves, whether you're indie or trad. And so for me, that would have been the main attraction for trad publishing, but it's not really like that anymore. So I just personally, I wanted control of my work, and I just didn't see enough benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people who end up choosing indie publishing can probably relate to your experience as well. I think the timeline is a really big factor for a lot of people. I know it was for me. I couldn't imagine like finishing this book I was so proud of and that I had worked so hard on, and then just to see nothing happen to it for such a long time would have been really heartbreaking to me, because I don't know. I've just really enjoyed seeing the response from my readers about how much they like it and how much they want to read the next one. And I could have potentially not ever have seen that, or even have had that connection to my readers. I think that's another thing that's really interesting about indie publishing, is being able to like connect directly with your readers.
Yeah, I agree with all that, being, having your creative freedom, having that timeline. It kind of reminds me, you saying like if you go traditional, you could be like, a decade before you even find an agent. And I remember going to like an author event and seeing these. It was a couple authors with booths next to each other, and one had like 30 different books, and the other two had like one and two um, kind of different books. And I was like, well, my usual thing is, are you guys trad published or indie published? The ladies with the maybe one or two books were like, oh, we're trad published. I'm like, okay, that's cool. Like, congratulations and blah, blah, blah. And the other lady with like 30 books, like, yeah, I'm indie published. I'm like, yeah, I can tell. Not that, like, you know, um, her books were like any kind of low grade. They were like good looking books. She had so many. And so, her creative control is evident in her entire booth, as opposed to the traditional authors that kind of have to wait around, unfortunately. But, like, all publishing is valid, and, they probably chose their path for reasons, and the indie author chose her path for reasons, and um, yeah, there's nothing wrong with either path. The most important question we have, Cara, what does indie publishing mean to you?
Indie publishing to me means creative control. It means not letting a corporation decide anything about my art, because I'm just rebellious like that, and uncooperative, I guess. um, and it also means having this really great community of indie authors and readers, right? Like you said, you get to interact with your readers as an indie author, and I feel like I've gained most of my readers just by being in the community and engaging with people. And that's just been a very rewarding piece of this journey. So yeah, being an indie author is definitely about creative control, but also about community for me.
Yeah, I love, seems pretty much across the board, a lot of us really value our creative um, freedoms and being able to connect with so many like minded authors and readers. So it is like super important for all of us. Well, what are your biggest obstacles when it comes to publishing your book? Like after they've been written, what did you encounter that slowed down like the publishing process?
So that's the nice thing about being an indie author personally is not much slowed it down for me. But that's also because I do hire editors, but I design my own covers, so I'm not waiting on cover designers or anything like that. Um, I think the most that a book has been delayed was when I was ready to put out Lux in Between. My one of my best friends was publishing her debut novel, and she had originally planned to publish it in November, but she had to push it out. And so she was going to push it out, and when she picked her new date, it was really close to when I was going to publish mine, and I did not want like I wanted her debut novel to get all the attention it deserved and not, take away from any of that. So I pushed Luxe in Between out about a month so that they wouldn't overlap like that and we could just celebrate her book for a while. Um, Again, also, I mean, that was Lux in Between was my fifth, right? And her debut novel was her debut novel, obviously. Which, by the way, it's called Mark of the Indicative by Carlene Staves. And since you all like high and epic fantasy, it is it is not YA, it is new adult epic fantasy, and I do recommend it. But generally, yeah, I don't have a lot of obstacles, and that's kind of nice.
Yeah, well, I feel like that kind of leads into the next question, which is what is the easiest part of indie publishing for you? What do you think you naturally do well or have adapted to quickly?
Like I said, I do my own covers, and that's been kind of a fun part of it for me. My first efforts were definitely not great, but I improved and got better pretty quickly, and I get a lot of compliments on my covers, so that's just a fun, little piece of it for me. Some parts aren't as fun, right? But I do like designing my own covers, and outside of that, the writing, like the drafting, I love every part of making a novel come to life, whether it's drafting or editing. I love editing. Some people hate editing. I feel like I'm lucky in that I love the entire process. So,
Yeah, I feel like you are really lucky that you enjoyed the entire process because as an indie author, you have to wear so many different hats. You know what I mean? Like the fact that you were like, well, I'll just make my own covers and then I don't have to wait on anybody. That shows that adaptability that indie authors have that I love. It's that you guys are so willing to just be like, you know what? I'll do it myself. And loving editing is extremely rare. I want you to know that, Kara. You're like that girl that's like, oh yeah, I get my period for like 3 days and I don't even get any cramps. Like you're like, I love editing. Whereas like I'm over here like I'm gonna shave my head if I have to edit one more page.
I know everyone hates editing. The one part of editing that I find tedious is just like finding my overused words. There's always that pass through you have to do where you're like, how many times did I say just or that did not need to be there? That's maybe the only piece I don't really love, but the rest of it just revisions and adding things in because I tend to underwrite. Um, Line edits, I love making it better. Like I love seeing it get better with every pass through. So
I posted this video one time that was like I thrive in pain and it was just me editing. That's me like finally seeing it come better. I'm like yes, it was worth all the effort that I put into this. What is your best piece of advice for people who want to self publish that you wish you would have known ahead of time?
I think I would have to say that writing the book is just the beginning, right? The work is not over even once the book is published. You need to get used to talking about it and talking about yourself. Marketing is forever. That's
Yeah.
I did not fully realize that before I published my first few books. Um, Also, just a little plug for a free resource on my website. I have a little free PDF. It's like 30 pages about all kind of the basics of self-publishing. So when new indie authors ask me questions, I'm always happy to answer them. But I also say, hey, go download this thing because it's going to have a lot of just kind of the facts, the frequently asked questions, right? So
Oh, I love that. We love any resources that you can give. So we are absolutely on board with you self plugging that. And if you're listening, please go download it. I think it could probably help you out.
Yes, any resources is so valuable in this little industry. Well, you know, since all things come easy, or you love all things within the process, I am so jealous. That wasn't bitter just then. What is one thing you wish came easier to you when it comes to writing, editing, marketing? Like, is there something that maybe is a little weaker on your scales that you would like to make better?
Yes, I did not mean to mislead you. I don't love marketing. I hate marketing. The process of writing the book, right? I love all those pieces. As far as running a small business as an indie author, I don't like being in front of a camera. Like my son forced me onto TikTok. He was like, "Mom, if you want people to read your books, you have to get on TikTok." He made the account for me. Like he took my phone from me and made the account. My teenager, right? Because I was just like, I don't want, I don't like recording myself. I don't like video editing. I'm not good at it, and I don't really want to learn either. I've had to learn some, but I'm just not interested. I don't want to do that part, you know. So I think like my dream is to eventually have enough money, whether it's from my books or something else, to like hire a PA who's in charge of my marketing. And like even if I still have to make videos, she can tell me what I'm talking about that day or whatever. And or he, I would love a personal assistant to take over both the creativity you have to, because I feel like that's the other thing is marketing is really draining creatively, and I get so annoyed when I have to spend so much time on coming up with videos that I'm like, I could be putting this effort into a book, right? I just want to be writing right now. I don't want to be doing this. So if I could hire someone else to do that someday, that would be amazing. That and just all the other little administrative tasks that I don't think any of us enjoy, like fighting with Ingram Spark or KDP on your cover dimensions or whatever the heck the problem is that particular day for that book. Just all the, there's just so much minutia. You're running a small business and you're doing the whole self-publishing process, beginning to end, mostly on your own. And it is a lot of work, and there's just a lot of behind the scenes work that is not the most fun part. For me, writing, editing is the fun part, but all the administrative tasks and all the marketing, I would love to not ever have to do again.
I think we all agree with
Yes.
you. We don't like marketing either. It is an entirely different skill than writing your book, and I am always in awe of people who seem to have very easily figured out how to market their book, and they've just become so accustomed to speaking about it in a way that's interesting and engaging, whereas I'm like, okay, so imagine, and there's, well, okay, let me start over. Like, that's how I feel every time I'm trying to describe my book to people. And I feel like sometimes that can, like, be reflected in videos where, you know, I'm having to, like, re-record over and over and over. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, and I have to cut that out. Versus I see some people who, they're so blessed to just be able to be like, hey guys, so this is exactly what my book is about, and people are like, wow, that's exactly what I was looking for, going to download right now. And so it's just this really long feat to market.
Yeah.
Agreed.
It is a long-term goal to be able to have a whole team of people to help us out. I mean, we'd still have our indie author friends in the community to turn to, but I mean, I don't know. I'm not gonna hire poor Jade here to do all of my marketing on top of, this podcast and her books. So it's like, but we can at least bounce ideas off each other, I suppose. It's not the same, but yeah, that is like a long-term goal that would be really cool. Um, and yeah, marketing is draining and it just keeps going. Um,
Mhm.
are there any future goals you have, Kara? Events, releases? I mean, you just released that poetry book.
Mhm.
Just like anything you want to mention?
I have a list. So first of all, I do have an event coming up on November 2nd in Mesa, Arizona. It's called Books in the Desert, and that is an all-day just book signing convention. Um, and I do have details on my website, but you could also Google Books in the Desert and it would come up. I don't know if this will be released before November 2nd, but I figured I'd mention that. I also have the Kickstarter for Token of a Wolf, which will launch in early 2025, probably early February, but that pre-launch page is up. So folks can go follow it if you're interested in that. That one's kind of a dark urban Little Red Riding Hood inspired romantasy with mystery and a vigilante wolf shifter and a bruja FMC and slow burn romance. So if any of that, is up your alley, then the pre-launch page for that is live, and I'm also still accepting ARC reader signups for that book. So let's see. I also wanted to mention that Lux in Between and Lux in Quest, since those are the books we're talking about today, are available on audiobook. And the third one is scheduled to be recorded in March. So that's going to be awesome. They are duet narrated by Paige Reisenfeld and PJ Freeborn. They're amazing. They did such an amazing job. I love them. And for audiobook lovers out there, I have a couple other books that were made into audiobooks as well on ACX. The Luxe ones, though, I own outright. They're available wide. They're on my website. They're everywhere. So book 3 should be out in the spring, which is exciting. Let's see. What else? I had to make a list. There were too many things
Okay.
that I wanted to mention. I already mentioned the poetry. I think that the only other thing is I do a live on TikTok called Writers and Wine every second and fourth Friday evening with my bestie Carlene, the author of The Could Be Indicative. And that's super fun. And we do also interview authors once a month. So um, we say it's a live for unhinged, cozy people, and our tagline is normal doesn't exist here. So if that sounds like your vibe, you should stop in and say hi one of those Fridays. That's all I have. That was a lot.
That's awesome. Yeah. So remind everybody where they can find your books.
So Luxe's Lullaby Trilogy is on KU, and you can get the paperbacks anywhere. They're widely distributed. So barnesandnoble.com, Amazon, my website. If you want signed copies, you can go to my website. And then, like I said, the first 2 books are also available as audiobooks, also widely distributed. So you should be able to find those pretty much anywhere.
Perfect. And what are your social media handles for anybody listening that wants to find you?
My TikTok one is at Cara Blaine, and for Meta, for FB, Threads, and Instagram, it is carablaine.author.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to Cara Blaine for being here with us for an amazing interview. Next week, you'll be able to catch S.M. Campbell, author of Corrupted Tides, here on the Indie Book Nerds podcast.